So it is time to record my film reveal video. This is a video where I look at my film for the first time, kind of give my initial reactions to it, and in some cases, tell some of the more of the stories as far as what happened on the trip, stuff that didn't really make the video journals. And I gotta say, I'm pretty nervous about this because this is a trip where when I was in Death Valley, I felt like I never really had that moment where everything was calm and I had all the time I needed to set up the camera. There's times, I think there's like 3 times I set the camera up in the dark. And then there's also some moments where things are just changing so fast that I don't really have any confidence as far as the exposures that I made. So it'll be interesting to kind of see how everything turned out. But I have my Sony up top, that is shooting 4K video. And then this is filmed on my G7X Mark II, which is high definition. So you guys will be able to see for the first time the film in 4K, where hopefully you'll be able to see some more details and stuff than I typically am able to show in the film reveal video. So I had 6 sheets of color negative film, Kodak Ektar, and then I had 26 sheets of slide film, combination of Velvia 50 as well as Provia 100. So let's start by taking a look at the color negative film. All right, so this is a photo I don't really have high expectations for. This was taken on the day when it was raining in Zion. And as I was driving along, I saw so many great things that I just wanted to photograph, but by the time you get the camera out, by the time you get it set up, things just change. And actually when I drove by, there are some salt flats down here with some really kind of like lighter colored areas, some like white salt down here. And then there's a band of like bright area here, and then there's some dark clouds as this like rain was sweeping in towards me. And I set this photo up underneath the rear hatch of my 4Runner. And so the camera wasn't getting wet or anything like that, but I think in this, by the time I shot it, the sky was just all just uniform and white, so it's not gonna have any drama to it. And this is one where I also tried to expose a sheet of black and white, but I accidentally put another film holder with Ektar in it, so I shot 2 sheets of color even though I thought it was black and white. But I don't really have any high hopes for this. It'll be interesting to see when I scan it. But I think it was more so an exercise of just trying to point the camera at something on a day that was very frustrating because things are just changing so incredibly fast. Next up is, this is interesting. So this was taken the same day. This was in the afternoon when the storm was starting to clear out. And when the storms clear out, you get these really beautiful conditions, these clouds that hang along the mountains. But it was so frustrating because things, again, were changing so fast. This was with my 600mm lens, which is equivalent to maybe like a 100mm lens. And it's interesting, there's a reflection of some water, partially flooded salt flats here, mountains, some clouds hanging along them, and some layers, and I'm not sure what to think about as layered it is as it is. I mean, that's what attracted me to it, but I was actually on my way over to Badwater with Thomas Heaton, and because he wanted to kind of finish up a video down at Badwater as the storm was clearing. And I saw this scene out the window as I was driving, so I stopped and said, hey, I want to try to set up a photo here and see if I can get something. And I have some slides of this one as well, so it'll be interesting to see how this looks when I scan it, but also how the slides look. But I'm not hating it, so that's good, I guess. Another variation of that first photo. Again, it was raining when I shot this, so who knows, maybe it'll be some sort of like moody atmospheric photo, but I also just probably gonna be just super blank up top. And these bushes are kind of like a yellowish kind of color, so they kind of stood out from the very neutral color of the rocks and stuff. I'll have to scan it to see how it looks, but I don't really have any high expectations for that photo. But no light leaks, so it turned out, so that's good at least. Now this is interesting. So this is a photo that I shot the afternoon after the inversion. And I found a composition that had these kind of lines that kind of pinched in a little bit from the corners. And actually I have some clouds up there, which is kind of nice. What I was hoping would happen is that I'd have some light hitting the mountains here as the foreground is in shade, but I think just the way the mountains are set up, it didn't really work out quite the way I wanted it to. But again, things are changing so fast. I'm glad I shot some Ektar on this because I see I have clouds, and I don't know if I shot this after the light was already hitting the foreground or if the light was still hitting the foreground. I suspect it is because I see a big change between that tone and that tone. But this area is kind of like a dark gray sediment, and then these bushes are kind of like a yellows and greens, and so it's kind of an interesting area. But we'll see. I'm glad I at least have it on color negative. Again, no light leaks, nothing weird going on there. So that part at least is good. So this is in Zion now. I'll turn this so you can see the whole thing. Now I shot this one on slides as well. But this is interesting because this is like right along the trail. This is not far off the beaten path at all. I mean, this is literally right on the trail, right in an area where you can park your car. And this, I think, is a good illustration as to why I like to return to the same locations at different times of the year. Because this is a bleached white cottonwood tree that's dead, that's leaning against a live cottonwood tree. And they're kind of embraced there, and this live tree is holding up the dead tree. And it looked very poetic to me. And I shot this both on slide as well as color negative because it's a pretty bright trunk. I just want to make sure I had things covered. I look forward to seeing the color version to see how the trees stand out from the background. But when I shot it, I had kind of a working title called Love Story or something along those lines, but very sort of poetic image. So I'm glad that one turned out, and we'll see how the slide turned out of it. And this is the other scene I shot that same day. So this is another dead cottonwood tree. This one's not quite as bleached as the one I just showed you, but this is one where I've tried to find some way to photograph this tree through the years. And it's you know, it fell over and it's kind of sinking into some of the mud there as far as when the flash floods go through, it kind of maybe drops a little further. But during the spring and during the fall, I could never find a way to compose it, but during the winter time, it worked really well because in the background, first of all, you have this big wall of sandstone, but in the background, you have all these trees and stuff, and that color, I think, would distract if it's during the spring or during the fall, but during the winter time, it's a much simpler color palette. And let me check sharpness on this one. Oh, that looks good. So this was with a normal lens. I used a little bit of front tilt. So I'd only expect to be sharp maybe from about here up. I don't expect the immediate foreground, and that's exactly how it is. So as expected, which is good. So I have that one on slide as well, so I look forward to seeing how that turned out. And that is the last of the color negative. So now it is time to look at the slide film. Interesting. Now, this was taken the morning that the rain really started. So this was on my second day. And this was challenging because I had to set the camera up in the rain, which is hard to do. I had a grad filter on there and water was getting on the grad filter, so I had to clean it. In the process, I kind of like messed up 2 of my grad filters, but it was a juggling act. But you know, it actually works pretty well. It's a little bit of a long exposure, so you can see the cloud movement there. This is my wide angle lens, a little bit of clouds building in there. The exposure is spot on. We got the brightest area right there, darkest area is probably right there. All very good. And then there's like this kind of little twig thing in the middle, which I didn't know what to think about when I was setting up the photo, but I don't hate it. Actually has kind of a calm sort of feel to it, and I use the Camera Essentials dark cloth, which is a really big dark cloth. I can cover the whole camera and insert film holders and everything else. It's kind of cool. I think I might have another version of that one as well. And here it is. Now what's interesting is that this one, you got a lot less blue up here. You got some more clouds hanging along there, which is cool. But this one, it might just be a difference in exposure, but also I think this was taken earlier in the morning. So this is the first one I shot. You can see also the difference in color temperature between the foreground here and here. And so even though you got some more clouds here, and maybe I could scan it differently. I got detail there. I like the mood of this one a little better. But I think it also just depends on how I scan it. So let's check for sharpness. Oh, that's sharp. Tac sharp. So this one was set up mostly in the dark. But with the Arca Swiss camera, I was able to focus on the mountains in the background and then use the micrometric Orbix front tilt to tilt for the foreground with a flashlight. So I'd have a hard time doing that with the ebony camera I've used in the past. So that's cool. That's actually a bit of a surprise because I had kind of written that shot off as just a matter of setting up the camera and otherwise not good conditions. Not really digging this one. So this was the first photo I shot on the trip. And all the mud cracks there, some salt grasses kind of starting to grow out of the mud cracks. Just after I set up the camera before I shot the photo, there's this really crazy loud, I don't know if it was a crack of thunder or a sonic boom or whatever it was, but it was loud. And it echoed off the mountains over here, then the mountains on the backside. And yeah, it's kind of disjointed. I mean, I like what's going on here. I like the fact that you see some rain coming there, you see these clouds kind of arcing down there, but it's like two separate things, and the sky is not interacting with the foreground because the lighting isn't quite the same. So again, a good exercise of getting out there and exposing that first sheet of film, which is important to do on the trip. And it's sharp, so all the details there. But I don't think it's a really cohesive image as a whole. But again, it's important to get that first photo out of the way. Now actually, I also shot this on black and white, and I have not developed the black and white yet. So maybe that's a black and white photo. Maybe it's more cohesive in black and white. I'll have to maybe develop that next week or so. So this is the clearing storm. So this is the same day as the two shots back, but this is in the afternoon, and this is kind of a little disjointed. It was a hectic scene. I was trying to place a grad filter. I was trying to expose the film. I'm not really digging this. The light's not really great there. There's some nice light right here, but the foreground's just kind of dull. So not really digging that. I think I have some more of this scene though. But I mean, I was just stretching to try to find anything to point my camera at that day. So here's the same scene. This one's a little on the, seems a little dark perhaps. I mean, there's enough detail to scan, but what's interesting is how different that is from this, even though they were taken pretty close to each other. I mean, it was taken maybe like 10 minutes apart. So you can see how much that scene changed. I do like the fact that you got these clouds up here and the clouds kind of hang along the mountains. But I don't know. I don't know if I like all the layers, especially this one really stands out, almost like I got a crop. We'll see. Let me check for sharpness. Appears to be quite sharp. That's good. Not bad. I mean, I was expecting the worst, but it's okay. But I'll have to see how that one looks when I scan it, because you never quite know until you scan it. And then this one's an underexposed version of that one. I think I know what happened here. So I shot a sheet of Ektar, which I already showed you guys. And then I shot another sheet of Velvia. And I think I still had my meter set for Ektar. I don't think that this one's all that much different of a scene than this one. It's basically the same general moment. But yeah, that's underexposed. That was just a sloppy error for just trying to find something to point the camera at. But I'm really curious about the Ektar shot, because the Ektar will probably be a very similar moment, given that this one is so dark. All right, so this is a tricky scene. So you already saw the color neg version of this one. This was taken the afternoon of the inversion. And I'm a little dark. Move this over here. And I got detail there. It's actually not bad. Actually, I do have detail there. It might be hard for me to scan it on my flatbed scanner, but on drum scanner, it'll get it. But this is quite interesting because I didn't expect much from this scene. Things are changing so fast. I like the fact that there's light right here and not right there. I don't know if that was a result of a cloud or a mountain. I was really hoping to get this lit up and then this in shade. I'd placed a grad filter. It's interesting. I don't know. I guess I'll have to scan the Ektar to see how that one turns out. It was a tricky exposure. It was hurting my brain trying to expose for the scene. I had the dark shadows, the bright highlights, but I had clouds. I didn't realize the clouds were in the composition. So interesting. I'll have to sit on that one for a while. Oh, and then here's another version of that one. So this is more so the foreground I was going for. But see, that light was moving so fast. It went from lighting everything up to like that way too fast. I like the calm light in the foreground. Again, I'm a little bit dark, but I got detail there. But I wish this light was more so hitting this area right here. And who knows, maybe I have, maybe the Ektar one's kind of like that. That was so tough to do though. I was so frustrated as I was setting up that scene. Oh, and this is my safety shot. This is way too strong of light. This is when you really should not be using Velvia. I mean, look how dark those shadows are. I'm not blowing anything out, but it's too crunchy, I guess is what I'd say. And I knew that would be the case. That is sharp. I knew that would be the case, but I felt like I had to at least expose a safety shot. So even if the other shots don't turn out right, at least I can get a chance to look at my composition and get a feeling for how it turned out. Those clouds turned out really nice. Now, I never use a polarizer when I shoot Velvia for the skies because it could be too much for it. But I'm really curious about the Ektar version of that one. So this is interesting. So this is a scene that I shot the day after the inversion. And you can see there's a mist hanging here down across the valley there. And I thought I had messed up the inversion photos. And I still don't know because I haven't seen those yet, but I thought I'd messed those up and setting up the camera in the dark and tricky exposure and all that. So I was determined to find some way to make good use of whatever conditions were left in Death Valley. I got up at 3:30 in the morning. I went out in the dark and was determined to find something to point my camera at and to get a composition set up. And I found it. So this is a scene I found, and I like this kind of little mud cove, as I called it, with a little grass island there. And so I set up the camera with a normal lens, and I used rear movements to enlarge the foreground, to shrink the background a little bit. I used a little bit of front tilt, and I should be in sharp focus, everything maybe above this line, all the way to there. I know I'm gonna give up the extreme foreground because my plane of focus drops down a little bit. Let's see how I did. Oh yeah, that's sharp. That's very sharp. Actually, the whole thing's pretty good. So, yeah, the absolute extreme foreground here is a little out of focus, but it's fine. That's exactly what I intended. But it's not a bad scene. I shot quite a few sheets of film on that scene. I like that. And next one is the same subject. So this one seems better balance, I think, between the sky exposure and the foreground. Even though there's no clouds up there, there's a really nice gradient in the sky. And the film picked that up pretty well. So, interesting. So if I look at that, compared to this guy, you can see the sky's a hair darker there and a little warmer tone there. So I'll really have to kind of study those and see which ones I like best. But this captures a feeling of standing there and looking at that scene, which is one of my goals. And, all right, so this one's not very good. I use a grad filter, a soft grad. I'm good up here, but I'm way too dark here. I should have had a stronger grad filter, which surprises me a little bit because, I mean, to me, that's a 2-stop grad, but maybe because it's a soft grad, it darkened this down too much. And maybe what I should have used is a hard stop grad, just hit that area right there. But then I might have some weirdness. But at this point, the light wasn't as good as the other photos anyways. I mean, I got light hitting the peak up there, but just because of the angle that I'm shooting here, I'm really not going to get, I mean, the mountain over here to the right, like way over here, this area here was lighting up really nice because the sun's hitting it from a different angle. I like the mist there though, that's cool. Would have been nice to have shot that on Ektar, because then I'd be able to have both of those. But I think the other one turned out fine. And here's another version of that scene. So this one, I'm getting a little light on the peak there. A little more mist there. That mist was growing in as the sun came up. And eventually, the whole sky clouded up. I have a similar amount of mist there. I was so happy to find that scene. I was just shooting tons of film. This one so far is probably the strongest. It's a little warm in the foreground. I can always change the white balance on that just a little bit. And there's the more recent one. And then I have another one. This one okay, so this is Provia. And Provia was one of the first ones I did. So it doesn't have quite the punch of Velvia. I shot so much film on this scene. But, interesting. I'll have a lot to sort through and see what works out really well. So next up, look at that. So this is the inversion. And I was very, very fortunate to be there during this event, because I don't think this happens very often in Death Valley, to have the whole valley there filled with clouds. And when I woke up that morning and I turned on my headlamp, it was just like, I was just in this dense fog with these big, big drops of water just floating around the sky. And I remember getting up and then sort of being confused by the fact that it was foggy. And Thomas Heaton was getting up at about the same time because we were sharing a campsite. And we're having a little conversation about the conditions. And he said, I bet this is an inversion. And sure enough, I kind of decided to go up to Dante's View, because I'm at about a mile up compared to the salt flats down below. And sure enough, there was an inversion. So I give him a lot of credit for recognizing that scene right away as far as what was going on. And he was originally going to go to shoot some salt flats nearby, but it was so foggy down there that he decided to come up top, which was definitely the right move. So that was a really special morning. But I set the camera in the dark, which is hard to do. I was able to focus on the mountains there in the background and use just a little bit of tilt to focus for the foreground. And this is different than the Ebony camera I've worked with in the past, because on the Ebony camera, what you do is you focus for the foreground, you tilt for the background. And just because the Arca Swiss, the front tilt is different, it's an asymmetrical front tilt, I've since learned that makes that camera so much easier to set up in a very, very sort of tricky dark situation. So let's check the focus here and see how we did.
I think I got a little bit of wind movement on the mountain there. It's just a little shaky looking.
So I think this may be wind affected, but I have a lot of photos of this scene. So we'll see. And also I should say that when I was setting up the composition, I could just barely make that out. And what I do is I use the mountains as a rule of measure. So on the ground glass, I measured 1, 2, so basically 2 heights of the mountains for sky. And then I can look at the scene, I know which clouds are going to be in the composition. There's some high clouds out there that cut some light, which is really nice. But this one, we'll see. We'll see if I have another one that's sharper. Next up, another sheet of Provia. Ah, look at this. So we got a little light going on there. So it's catching a little bit of light. I got a good enough exposure for the foreground. A little cloud kind of going over there. Let's see how we did.
That one's sharp. Yay. That one's very sharp.
Even the foreground is sharp. I was nervous about if I got the foreground sharp, but it's my wide angle lens, so it's gonna get a lot in focus. This captures the feeling of being up there and watching it. I feel like the compositions, I wish I had more on the left side. I mean, to my eyes, this area looked really nice, the way it kind of tailored off, but the fact that, I don't know, maybe there's a crop there or something. But such a beautiful scene. And I leveled the camera perfectly. I almost feel like it's a little uneven. Well, we'll see. Next up, ooh, I'm curious. Interesting. So this is the orientation that the photo is taken. But if I flip it, it's a little better. And I think it's because you have this line that kind of drops in, because the eye usually enters from here. This kind of drops in and it kicks you up there, and there's some lines there that kind of kick you up there as well. Definitely a tricky scene and a tricky exposure. But here, actually, I think this benefits more, because you get a chance to kind of look at this and then your eye goes there. And now I'm not missing that side. So this might be one of those photos that I flip. To me, that looks a little unbalanced. That looks more balanced now. Interesting. And let's check sharpness.
That is sharp. Very, very, very sharp, which is good. And foreground. And even though it's a little dark, there's detail there.
Definitely a Velvia sort of photo. I may have to lighten this a little bit. Interesting. Interesting, interesting. So here is we're getting the first light on the peak there. And you see the earth shadow back there. And again, I like it better this way. So what I was worried about when I was setting this up was the exposure of those clouds, because I used a 2-stop soft grad to kind of darken all this down here and hopefully get a little more detail down here. And
that is sharp. That is sharp. I do have good detail. So
I have plenty of detail there. But again, I think it reads better this way. Interesting how it can change so much. I mean, some of you guys might look at this and say, hey, that looks fine the way it is, but to me it looks kind of skewed and a little out of balance. But that looks more balanced. And maybe it's because I was composing it backwards or something like that. When you see it on the ground glass, it looks different. So this is interesting. This is, I shot this photo simply because it was an optical illusion. This is looking down. This is looking down slope dramatically. So looking down as the mountain dropped down into the clouds. But when I was kind of framing it, I just kind of put my hands up like this as I was framing it. It tricked my brain into thinking I'm looking up at a mountain. So I feel like I'm looking up at a mountain, and then there's clouds that the mountain peak is up in. And so it's really kind of a trippy optical illusion. And if you didn't know I was looking down, I think you'd probably look at this and think it's going the other way. So I don't know that that's a photo I'll use for anything, but it's kind of a trippy scene. So a little experiment. So this is from Zion now. So this is the leaf shot. And it was frozen leaves. I did place this leaf right in the middle because I wanted to have something that kind of stands out a little bit, though. In retrospect, I see that this red leaf here is standing out a little too much. So if I can go back in time, I'd probably pick that one out of there because it, I think, distracts a little bit. I basically expose about as bright as I can, and then I can always darken it down a little bit in post. But this actually looks pretty close to reality. Maybe I can like desaturate that leaf just a little bit, just to take it down a notch. Check the sharpness.
You know, it's pretty good. I almost feel like it's a little bit off. It's hard to say because I'm looking at all these ice crystals. And it's such a razor thin depth of field. I think it's good.
It's hard to tell based on looking at the ice crystals, but if I look at the little veins and stuff on the leaf, it looks pretty good. This is simply just centering the leaf right in the middle. And that leaf there bugs me a little bit. That looks better. Shooting in reflected light, which I love shooting in reflected light. There is a sandstone area back behind me, but it's pretty good. I'll have to see what I can do with that leaf in post. But I don't have any frosty leaf shots in my portfolio, so I wouldn't mind adding one. And then a second exposure of that same scene. This one might be a little darker. I get the feeling this is slightly darker. I typically shoot them the same exposure. They're so close, but that one's a hair darker, which will give me a little bit of a challenge as far as which one to scan. Yeah, looks good. But again, I'll have to deal with that leaf. All right, so here's one of the dead trees. Now this scene, I wasn't originally planning on taking a photo of it this day because I was actually hiking back to my truck, and there were these three bucks that were on the trail, and I didn't want to sort of mess with them and get in their way, so I kind of walked off trail to another trail, and I came upon this tree, and this tree has always caught my eye in the past just because I just love the form, the shape of it, but I can never find a way to photograph it because when I've been there during the fall and during the spring, you have all these trees in the background. When they have leaves on them, it just distracts from the form of the tree. But in the wintertime, when those trees just kind of blend in and become uniform in the background, now it's all about kind of this tree, the light color against that dark background. And there's some beautiful reflected light on the scene. Some nice warm tones here versus this is catching some blue light from the sky. Just one of the absolutely beautiful things about Zion. And I used my normal lens to compose this, and my focus is probably gonna be good from about here on up. I don't expect this to be sharp down here. By just a little bit of tilt on the scene.
And oh yeah, that's tack sharp. Pretty much exactly as I expected. And it looks so real. What I really wish is that I can give you guys the experience of looking at these transparencies on a light table, because it kind of transports me back to the scene. It's like looking at reality. That's cool though. I like that. All right, up next, same scene. Now this one's a little brighter.
Let's go back to the other one here. So I didn't remember taking these at different exposures, but it does appear that this is brighter than this. This, I think, is going to start pushing the limits of the highlights. And yeah, it's okay, but I'm glad I have the two of them, because this will be pushing the limits of those highlights and having detail in them. But as far as just the viewing experience and viewing the picture as a whole, this one looks a little nicer because you see a little more detail back there. But the other one had detail everywhere. I just love that reflected light in Zion. It's very painterly, which is nice. And this is the other tree I photographed. So I'll turn it so you can see the whole thing. So this is that bleached white cottonwood tree. This is right on a trail, like literally the trail. I think the trail is right here because I'm kind of running along the trail here. I use a little bit of a longer lens. I use my 450mm lens. And this is right near a car park area. So it's not off the beaten path at all. But I never even really noticed this scene in years past. I think because when this tree has leaves on it, it just kind of steals the show a little bit. But now you get these winter cottonwood branches up against this wonderful sandstone in the background. And actually, I just noticed something which is kind of interesting. See that? A red maple in January. This is like January 12th or 13th or something. And there's a full-on red maple in the background. It's crazy. It's a really weird year for fall color, or winter color, I guess you would say. I used a little bit of tilt to get from the trunk, the base of the trunk, all the way up to these branches up here. It is tack sharp. And I like the way that there's a diagonal kind of led through the scene. And down here, down below, the living cottonwood tree kind of blends into the background, and this one kind of steals the show. But once you get up top, the living one really stands out against there, so altogether it kind of works. But to me, this photo almost looked poetic. It looked like this is one of those scenes that kind of has a story to tell. And when I was setting up the photo, a title for the photo kind of came to mind, which doesn't happen all the time, but something along the lines of a love story or something like that, because it looks like here's one tree and another tree, and then this one died in this one's arms, and still kind of holding it there. So that is pretty cool. I can't believe I've walked past that scene so many times and never really noticed it. And then here's my double on that. And this one's a little bit darker. And so I'll have to evaluate what's going to be best as far as scanning. This one, or this one, I'm getting a little bright right in there. I still got enough detail there, but I have better detail in this one. So I'm thinking maybe the darker one might be better to scan, because the dark areas I have all the detail in. So let's say this is the proper exposure. And I don't remember trying to bracket the scene. I mean, I shot doubles, but maybe I inadvertently bracketed somehow. But in any case, this one's a little bit better. But I like that. I like that. So it's interesting because I went into doing this video thinking that I'm going to have so many bad photos and so many like rushed scenes, and a lot of stuff turned out really, really well. I guess it was one of those trips where I felt like I was chasing the light the entire time, and that's a really tough thing for me to do with that camera. But I think I have probably maybe like 4 really solid scenes I photographed, and yeah. I was almost dreading doing this because I just figured that I'd have so many bad scenes. But I think at a certain point, instinct sort of takes over. And the self-doubt that I had with regard to the first few photos, actually almost all the photos in Death Valley, I figured I just messed them all up. But that self-doubt kind of led me to work harder to capture even more photos. And I'm glad they turned out. But now I know how the photos turned out. I gotta start working on getting these scanned. I gotta start working on doing the video journals. You guys know how the story went. I'm just kind of figuring it out right now. I've only been back from the trip a few days, but I want to thank everyone for watching, and see you on my next trip. If you enjoy this ad-free content and want to help me live my dream, a voluntary contribution of just $24 a year helps keep my gas tank full and my film freezer stocked. For more information on how to support me and my work, please visit the donation section of my website at benhorne.com/donate. I also have prints in my 2017 portfolio box set available on my website. You can find a direct link down below in the show notes. Thanks in advance for your support.